My name is Ronald. I'm 20 years old and I live near a small town in Wayne County, West Virginia, called Lavalette. My family and I originally lived in Jacksonville, Florida during my childhood, but we eventually moved up north because we couldn't handle the humidity and oncoming hurricanes. Now, what I'm about to tell you guys is 100% true, and I swear it on my life that what I've experienced is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was last autumn on August 27th of 2017 when my experiences first began. It was a Saturday evening between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m. I was driving home from taking an incredibly long drive. I drove from my home to the town of Wayne and then past Tulsa to Louisa and finally as far as Chapmansville. I guess I drove a little too far for my liking, but anyway, it was getting dark, and I eventually found my way home in a form of a road called 8th Street near Lavalette that led me to Mount Union Road. It was the road that took me straight to the house of one of my dad's friends named Ezra, where there was this other road called Walnut Gap Road, and that was where, from there, it would take me home. Now, on this road, there's a blind curve next to an old abandoned white church, in which I always slow down on before driving around the curve just to make sure nobody was going to come flying around the corner. Right as soon as I do that, there's a 6-foot ledge on the left side of the road where some small trees have fallen over, whereas on the other side there's a steep hillside that has a path cleared through the thick underbrush where deer like to hide. And right in that spot is where my first encounter happened. Just as I slowly drove around the corner, I saw this. It was a thing, and it stepped onto the road with all fours when I first saw it. I thought it was about a 500-pound male black bear because it was roughly the same size as one, and we do tend to have a few roaming around where I live. But then I noticed that it actually was more like a wolf because it had a long bushy tail, very large pointed ears, and a canine-like snout. It also had the same body shape as a wolf with jet black hair but these glowing amber-colored eyes. By the time it stepped onto the actual road, the wolf had turned its head towards my direction and it stared right at me. I was ecstatic at first to actually see a wolf in the wild, but at the same time I realized there was something rather off about this encounter. There shouldn't even be a wolf out here, let alone a wolf this big. In fact, the more I even think about it, there shouldn't be any wolves here in the entire state of West Virginia anymore since the timber wolves that once lived in these wolves were all killed off. Was the government secretly using some kind of conservation efforts here and repopulating wolves in the state? I have no idea. But either way, how did one get so huge? This thing was massive. And not only did the wolf's abnormal size catch my attention, but so did the look in its eyes. They looked different from what I've seen in the eyes of any canine or anything other than people for that matter. And they looked just far more intelligent than anything I've ever seen. Whatever theory I've had to support any rational explanation for this unusual sighting was immediately shot away when this creature did something that I also will never forget for the rest of my life. This is something that still haunts my soul to this very day. When we both stared at each other, even while I was inside my car, I heard what sounded like bones popping or perhaps knuckles cracking loudly. And to my absolute shock, I watched this wolf place its hand on top of my hood and raise itself off the ground to stand up on two legs. And yeah, you did hear me right. It was not a paw it placed on the hood. It was a hand. When the wolf stood up and my headlights hit it square on, that's when I got a really good look at it. It was easily 8 foot tall and had to weigh at least 650 pounds. As I said, it was covered in jet black hair that seemed quite feral in my opinion, as if it hadn't been cleaning itself that often. And it also had a long bushy tail and two glowing amber yellow colored eyes. They actually seemed to glow. But to my shock, it was more than a wolf standing on its hind legs. It had a human-like torso from the waist up that appeared extremely muscular with these giant broad shoulders and long forearms, longer than those of any human I've ever seen. I could see the muscles of this wolf-man thing pulsating with each breath it took, especially because of the headlights. It also had these dexterous hands that looked almost like raccoon hands, but with more elongated fingers with long jet black claws at each fingertip. They looked like they could be used to easily manipulate any kind of prey in its clutches. And they looked like they could easily rip me to shreds, or maybe even more. Now, the hind legs resembled more like that of a dog or a wolf. This I could easily tell because they bent backwards and they had massive paws for feet, from the looks of which it was standing more on its toes than its actual feet. Now, this thing had a massive head, similar to that of a wolf or a large German shepherd, but bigger in proportion, with pointed ears and tufts of fur at the tip of each ear, as well as a long muzzle with these great big fangs gouging out at the front of his snout. Now, to be honest with you, the fangs had a very eerie resemblance to those of a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, but the rest of it looked like a werewolf or a man-wolf. The eyes were the one thing, the only thing about my encounter that night that will terrify me for the rest of my life. And I'll never forget this. I mean, even writing about it now sends a bone-chilling fear straight down my spine. As I've said to you prior, the eyes, they looked extremely intelligent, far smarter than any animal I've ever come to know in my neck of the woods. But they also held this feeling that told me I was looking into the eyes of something that just spelled evil out of them. Finally, I gained this overwhelming sense of dread after seeing it walk to the side of my car on two legs. It slowly bent down to level its eyes with mine, and I froze in pure, unadulterated horror when it used its hand to jiggle the door handle and tried to open my car door. Thank God that all my doors were locked and every window was up, but this still was horrifying to a point where I couldn't even breathe. This wolfman, as I previously called it, he gave out a grunt and actually frowned at me for a few seconds before standing back up and walking to the other side of my car. It jiggled the other door handle adjacent to me on the passenger seat. Whatever this thing was, it was intelligent enough to not only know what a door handle is, but how to use it. At this point, I was absolutely shaking in my driver's seat with the same fear still latched into my soul. I just felt completely helpless in the eyes of such a beast. This was absolutely horrifying, and that's just how it felt in the time of this encounter. I felt like this thing, a creature that shouldn't even exist, yet was standing in front of my car, was the true ruler of the forest, and we humans were just nothing compared to this. It could have easily ripped the doors off my car and pulled me out. I could have never ran, I could never escape, and I could never fight it. There was nothing I could do, and I knew how powerful this predator was. Even if I didn't know it yet, just by looking at it, I knew a human being wouldn't stand a chance against it. And I knew that it knew I knew. I honestly thought I was going to die that night, that my family and friends would never see me again, and that they would never know that I was about to be killed or that I had been eaten alive by something no one even believes exists, and that there was nothing I could do about it. However, none of that ever happened. If it was God that was watching that night, protecting me from the malevolent beast, or if it was just luck, but instead of attacking me, the wolfman bared its teeth at me and then let out an extremely deafening snarl that seemed so guttural and just loud I couldn't believe it. And then it walked around to the front side of my car and crossed the road on its hind legs in less than 2 steps. After the first step, it was most of the way past the road, and into the second step, it was clear of the road completely. The encounter didn't end there, though. By the time it crossed the road, it paused for a couple of seconds before it slowly turned around to look back at me one last time. As soon as it did that, I could have sworn right then and there that it wasn't alone. It looked over its shoulders, and I could see multiple pairs of eyes staring directly at me, and I knew they were the same creatures as the first one because they held the same eye shine and gave off the same growls too. I estimate that I saw at least 5 other pairs of eyes staring at me. 3 of them were low on the ground as if on all fours, while the other 2 were standing upright, much higher off the ground. But they didn't reveal themselves out of the darkness like the first one did. In my opinion, I think he was the alpha male of this pack. If you all think encountering a werewolf-like creature was terrifying enough, imagine how I felt when I saw that there was more than one of these creatures. With that scary thought, I snapped out of my trance and decided to get the heck out of there. Slamming hard on the gas pedal, I bolted away and drove out of there like a bat out of hell. Now, I'm not pulling your leg here, but the distance from right where I was when I saw these things to my home, I literally arrived and pulled into the garage in just about 1 minute. By the time I arrived, I was in tears, and I've never felt that scared before in my entire life. Not only that, but my parents were concerned about the state I was in, asking me what happened. I basically told them everything that happened just before I pulled in. Now, I may have made up different stories and stuff before, but that was only when I was so little, and whatever I've experienced wasn't a joke this time. I told them the whole truth, with honesty, but with more terror in my voice than I'm sure they'd ever heard. Yet, of course, though, they didn't believe me. They just assumed that what I saw was a big black bear, and driving after dark like that makes your mind play tricks on you. But it wasn't a trick that I saw. It wasn't that long ago. I wasn't drunk, and I wasn't on drugs. So, I wasn't dreaming, nor was I hallucinating, and it wasn't even a simple misidentification. I know what I saw, and there's no doubt in my mind that it was real. This encounter has affected me so much that I was forced to isolate myself from everyone I knew, including my family and friends, for a little over a month or 2 before eventually breaking out of my shell and getting back to the social life again. However, I took this time to do some intense research on what I saw, and that's when I came upon the Dogman phenomenon for the first time. According to several eyewitness testimonies, people have reported seeing the same exact creatures all over the United States, and even in some remote parts of the world. This filled me with relief, knowing that I wasn't alone, that there are people out there who swear on their lives, just as me, that to this day that what they saw is real. They're not a haunting part of humanity's imagination like you would want to believe them to be. These monsters do exist in this world, and this fact alone makes us realize how small our world really is. It was me and my buddy, and we were in Roscommon, Michigan. We were on our way out into the woods for our evening hunt. The hunt went well. We saw the normal 2 or 3 deer, but we couldn't get a shot. So we left a little early because we were pretty irritated. We put our stuff in the back of the truck. My buddy heard something rustling in the woods behind us. So my buddy and I got our flashlights out of the truck and we went and shined our light into the brush. We saw two huge amber glowing eyes about 7 feet up off the ground. We followed them down and we could see just a massive dog's foot sticking out of the brush. So we ran immediately back to the truck in fear. When the lights turned on, we saw a dog that stood upright about 7 feet tall, and we started driving away, and we never saw it again. And this had to be the most horrifying experience of our lives. A few years ago, around midnight, I was on my way home to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan on I-75, just a couple hundred yards south of the Bay Road overpass in Mackinac County. I noticed something move near the highway reflectors. Thinking it was just a deer, I turned on the high beams and watched for it to cross the road. As I approached it, I noticed that what I thought was the reflectors on the highway was orange, and then it blinked on and off like an eye. I was just thinking, what the heck is that? I sped up to get closer, and as I did, I could see the silhouette of this animal, but it was sitting like a dog. Its head was even with the reflectors, but it stood on all fours and turned and walked down in the ditch, then up a little incline and turned and looked back at my truck. It turned back to the highway then, walked on all fours to the shoulder of the blacktop. It looked at the truck again with those orangish yellow eyes. The eyes were huge. It then jumped to within a foot or two of the center line, and then the next jump landed it in the grass on the shoulder of the road. I was probably about 100 feet away from it. Now, this animal was rippling in muscle, and it looked like it weighed over 500 pounds, if not much more. The hair which covered its body looked short, and its head was huge, with hardly no neck at all. After I passed where it crossed, I hit the brakes, as there were no cars on the highway, and started to back up. Now, as I got close to the spot where it crossed, I suddenly felt fear, and thought, what the heck am I doing? I put the truck back in drive and began to leave. As I was rolling the window up, I glanced back and noticed a light, bright like a floodlight, ascending into the sky at a high rate of speed. It was at an angle of about 1 o'clock, and in just a few seconds it was out of sight. Something else was strange, that there was not any light rays trailing it. This was the weirdest encounter of my entire life. Okay, well, in Houghton Lake, Michigan, in 2010, I went camping with my dad and my brother. We went out to the real woods, not just some campsite. It was somewhere around noon. We started to hear coyotes yelp and howl. My dad said that the coyotes are never out this early. My dad howled at them and they howled back. My dad thought maybe they were sick or just looking for some food. He said that they'd do anything for food, especially if they were sick. I didn't know about the legend of the dog man during that time, like I know now. But I was starting to wonder if maybe it was some kind of dog man. But anyway, it came to be bedtime for me and my brother, but my dad stayed up by the fire. He woke us up early, like 3 or 4 a.m., and made us go in the truck and sleep there for the rest of the night, because the sounds were only like 20 feet away at this point. I asked him the next day to howl at them, and he said no, because he didn't want them to come eat us. I thought he was just joking, but he said that the next time he is going to bring a real gun, just in case. This was absolutely terrifying. Probably just coyotes, but it horrified us in the moment. My dad and I were out hunting near Luther, and we were on this hill in the woods. There was this tree that was fork-shaped. I saw something standing there, but my dad didn't. It looked like a wolf that was standing up. I couldn't see him that well because it was about 30 yards away and there was a lot of foliage all around it. I never told my dad because he would have told me I was just seeing things. I shot at it with my BB gun to see just what it would do. All it did was just move a little and it just still stared at us. I can't believe my dad hadn't seen it, but he did not have his glasses on that day, which is probably why. We walked away and I turned around and I didn't see it anymore. Now, I know what he looked like because I saw an artist's rendition of him and I could see pretty much the same ears and most of the same picture. Now, this scared the crap out of me and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. I was walking in the woods with my boyfriend one day, and I saw something run in front of me at a distance. It did startle me, but at first I thought it was nothing, so we just kept walking. I saw it again, and it startled me again, even more this time because I didn't know what it was at the time, but it looked like a dog and a man at the same time. I wasn't sure if light was playing tricks on me, and it didn't dawn on me at the time, but after a few minutes of thinking about it, I remembered this legend of the Michigan Dog Man, which is pretty much where we were. My boyfriend just laughed at me when I told him I wanted to go home because obviously he didn't believe me. And we started to walk further away in the woods when my boyfriend finally saw it too. He decided to turn around immediately and go home. The closer we got to my house, it seemed that the figure got closer and closer to us. I looked behind us 3 or 4 times, but the very last time I looked at it, it started to run after us, so we ran the entire rest of the way home. It ran on 2 feet, and it stood extremely tall, but had the face of a dog. We never ever have gone into those woods again. I recently recalled an experience from my childhood that had been repressed in my mind since I was about 4 or 5 years old. Now, as a child, I grew up on a 20-acre lot just on the outskirts of a town called Cadillac. At the same time, there was more tree coverage and fewer industrial sites in this area. Now, we were mostly surrounded just by woods. One early summer morning, I had gotten up before dawn to watch my dad get ready to go off to work. Some mornings he'd get up at 3:30 to 4 a.m. to start his days. Me and my mom would get up and send him on his way. Daily routine back then. He'd always put on his work pants and his work shirts over his regular clothes and proceed to go out to his truck and load his equipment for the day. His work clothes were the dark and mossy looking material, really coarse feeling. So in the darkness he'd look really shaggy. The morning of my encounter, I had gotten up a little earlier than usual, and I was very groggy. I stumbled to the large plate glass window and saw something rummaging in the truck's bed over the side of the truck. I assumed it was just Dad, so I banged on the window to get his attention and waved to him. I was chilled to the bone by what peered back at me. A creature that stood on 2 feet, but for the life of me had the head of a dog. Was canine-like, but somehow human at the same time. We locked eyes for what seemed to be an eternity. Strangely enough, though, the eyes were not yellow as everyone else seems to see, but they were a pale greenish color. There was yellow, but it was far more green. I finally mustered a scream and fell backwards off the couch in front of the window. As I was falling backwards, the creature had already hit all fours and was lunging for the window. He started at a good 20 feet away at the truck's back end. My scream had gotten my dad out of the bathroom and into the living room, yelling to my mom to hush me up. He looked out the window and asked me what I saw, but I was just sobbing uncontrollably. He went to the front door and turned on the porch light, but found nothing. Annoyed that his morning was off to a not-so-quiet start, he made my mother take me back to bed, and he left for the day. I was so traumatized by this experience that I repressed it for many, many years. It took looking up a dog man by accident and then studying cryptozoology to kick the memory loose again. The house where this took place still stands, but the tree coverage that was abundant as a child in this story is all gone. Whatever that thing is, I'm sure it's still out there waiting, unless it died of natural causes, as nothing I've ever seen could have killed this. This past November 15th, my dad and I were heading to do our deer blinds. It was about 6:30, and it was very dark and foggy, and you could only see a few feet in front of you. I got in my blind and got ready. Then about 10 minutes later, I heard something running behind me. I got scared because the deer shouldn't be awake now. Then I could see something down the road. It looked kind of like a bear, but it was standing up on 2 feet. Then it stopped, and it looked like it was sniffing the air. I hoped it didn't smell me, because it was looking right at me. Then it just ran off the other way. I finally got the nerve to call my dad to come get me. Then I told him what happened. He told me that he saw 2 coyotes and that my cousin shot one. But something was weird. We never see coyotes out where we were hunting. But all of a sudden there were 3. It was like a coyote frenzy going on all around this massive, massive animal that did look more canine than bear. Do you think this could have been the dog man? A few years back in Topinabee, Michigan, my uncle was coming home from work, and he had just passed the Indian River golf course leading to the Topinabee, and suddenly this huge black object ran across the road. It stood on 2 legs, and it had the ears of a dog. He said its eyes glowed an amber color, and it moved faster than any animal ever should have. Me and my friend Eris, we were in the woods by Traverse City Christian School, and then out of the corner of our eyes we saw something we thought was Bigfoot. Now, it could have been the dog man, and this went through our minds, so we ran back to our cross-country group really fast. This thing just stood there on 2 legs, and all it did was watch. But no animal could ever be that big. A man and several friends saw Dogman in Grand Haven, Michigan in 1993 and 1994. A story about it is at the top of my strange Grand Haven page. Anyway, without giving myself a shameless plug, according to eyewitnesses, a creature fitting the description of the Dogman appeared in Grand Haven from 93 to 94. A guy out named Ben, who was a younger teenager at the time, saw the creature not once, but 3 times, and believes each time he was seeing another individual in what could have been a pack taking refuge in the Hoffman Nature Preserve. In 1993, after dark, Ben was hiking the trails in Hoffman Nature Preserve with as many as 4 friends, but he wasn't sure of 3 or 4. Just passing the float bridge near the center of the preserve, he heard a sound to his right. Now he spied what originally resembled a dog appear from behind a tree on the ridge above. Now, as he says, I thought it was just a dog walking, but then it stood up on its hind legs. He recalled this, but mostly, he says, in silhouette, between him and the moon, no more than 70 feet away, was when he realized that due to its size, this thing was over 7 feet tall, but had a very human-like outline. It was not just a dog. This dog man is reported to have a canine-like head, a human-like body, and walks upright, which is what he saw. Now he says it was on 2 legs, very tall but hunched over, was covered in thick black hair, and the eyes definitely reflected the light, just like a raccoon or a dog's eyes would, but much more intensely. One eyewitness reported who had seen the creature at night along the wooded road in northern Michigan. Did a vehicle hit the dog man, do you think? It was limping, they said, and it was acting wounded. In early 1994, a car on Lakeshore Drive was involved in a collision with a large unknown animal. The occupants of the vehicle were uninjured, and the police reported to have determined it was a deer. But witnesses said there was gray fur all over the front of the wrecked vehicle, with absolutely no blood, and the car was absolutely destroyed. The way that this story all fell together for me is just way too weird for this story to be any kind of untrue. It's just stranger than any kind of fiction. But about 3 years ago, my cousin Mike and I were dropping off his girlfriend and her friend after seeing a movie. It was about 11 o'clock, and we were going down this long gravel road that stemmed off of another backcountry road. Now, the long gravel road was about 2 miles long, and it led directly to his girlfriend's house. It was basically her driveway. After dropping them off and heading back up the driveway, we saw something off to the side of the road about 100 yards or so away. At first, we just figured it was some sort of animal, as it was, so we flashed the brights on it and tried to scare it off. Once we got closer, maybe just 20 yards away, we realized this thing wasn't anything we'd ever seen before. Whatever it was, it stood up. Its back was massive and hunched over, and its legs were very skinny. When it looked at us, its eyes glowed in the headlights. Scared to death, I just looked down. I did not want to look at this thing any longer than I had to. I was way too terrified. My cousin and I both sat there panicking. Do we turn the headlights off? What if we lose sight of it? Do we just turn the car off and let it walk away? What if there's another one, and if we start the car and we don't get away fast enough? Do we hit it and keep driving? What if we don't kill it and it sits on the hood and tries to get in the car? As both of us sat there in terror with these thoughts flying through our minds, I continued to watch it out of the top of my eyes. There was no way that I was going to look directly at this thing, or if there was another one. I don't want to see it either. All I could really see of it was just like skinny dog legs, but its massive upper body was enormous. It stood there for a second and then just walked into the woods on two legs. Up until a while ago, when I told people about it, I told them the only thing I remember were the way its eyes shined back, its large, hunched-over back, and its skinny, dog-like legs. But when my cousin and I talk about it, we just try to conclude that maybe it was a deformed bear or something, even though it walked just like a man. We had never heard of the Michigan Dog Man at this time. Now, the part where this story gets weird is when I was talking with a few of my other friends back at home just a few weeks ago. We were trying to get together a ghost hunting trip for when I came home on leave from San Diego in the Marines. I was online searching for Michigan hauntings and Michigan paranormal activity. And this is when I came across a story titled The Michigan Dog Man. Now, the police reports, the eyewitness accounts, and the drawings and everything matched my story perfectly, exactly what I saw. It was crazy to me that other people had seen what I saw that night. It had been about 3 years since then, and it was just insane that I'm only just now finding such a perfect explanation for what I saw. Alright, guys, that's everything we got this week. Cytokine Storm narrations. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, click the like, and definitely don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single episode just like this. Thanks, guys. See you in the next one.